well, which is more information for you. Okay. So objectives fit in to an overall development framework. Now this is a framework, and I don't think you can see down at the back you can see the text on that, but I'm going to talk you through it anyway. This is a framework that we developed inside Enterprise Ireland. It isn't rocket science, and anyone who wants any of these slides, you can drop myself or Dirk an email afterwards, and I think we're going to provide them, which is cool. So we built a framework for building strategies around our social media projects, and all new social media projects that we run in Enterprise Ireland, and we run about 50 or 60 of them between blogs and LinkedIn groups and Facebook pages and all the bits and pieces. They all have to pass this test, and it's a very, very simple process on paper. It's quite difficult when you actually sit down and do it. So I'm going to take it from the top. The very first thing that you have to look at when you're building a strategy is audience. Who is online that is talking about my service or talking about my sector? Where's my customer? Where are they online? Are they on Twitter? Are they on Facebook? Are they on, a very niche community portal site that that's where the nerds of that sector go to talk about nerdy things? You need to find out where they are, establish who they are, and establish, are they willing to be engaged in conversation? Do they actually want businesses to come in here and talk to them? That's really important, that you have a deep understanding of that community. So audience, that's the first thing. Second thing you have to decide on is a topic. What am I going to talk to these people about? And you wouldn't believe how challenging that is to people. To get them to write down the thing that they do. What's the value of my business to you? This is about messaging. So if you're not really, really clear about what it is you want to talk to people about when you go into these communities, they'll rip you to shreds. It'll very quickly emerge that all you really want to talk to them about is buying your stuff, right? And nobody wants to listen to someone asking them to buy stuff from them. There's no value there. So you need to have a good understanding about what you're talking about and how it's going to be communicated to that audience. Okay, so audience, topic. Objectives, we talked about those. They'll follow on from achieving, setting out those objectives follows on from the topic. And then you move on to resource. And this is really, really critical, because we've all seen websites that have a blog and it hasn't been updated since like January of last year, or a Twitter stream and it's got one update and it's got 2 friends or something like that. And you're better off not doing that at all, because it looks bad. It's a negative stain on your sort of your corporate web presence. So if you're not prepared to commit to these, and commit to them over at least a 6 to 12 month period, that's what you got to be looking at doing. You got to be saying, I'm going to do this for 6 months. I'm going to give it time because I've got these objectives that I've set out. So I'm going to commit to it with this resource. And that's really, really difficult to set aside that resource. And it's happened to everyone. It happens to my clients. It happens to us inside Enterprise Ireland. Something more important happens. And a resource who was supposed to write a blog or create the new newsletter or respond to a bunch of friend requests or whatever it happens to be on Facebook gets pulled away to something more important. And that's why this is useful, because we go back up to our objectives and we say, right, well, but this newsletter is going to reduce our customer service costs by 20% by the end of the quarter. We said it was going to do that, so we have to commit to it in terms of the resources. If there's something more important than achieving that objective, then by all means take that resource and put them somewhere else. But don't expect the objective to be met because you haven't effectively resourced it. And you do need to measure it up like that. Okay, resources have to move around the place, times are tight for everyone, and everything is critical. Everything is more important than the last thing. But if you have a process like this where you've said, this is my objective, I'm going to say that's not as important as whatever now has occurred. And that's fine to do that, but be rational like that. Don't just let it slide, because you'll never really get back into it. The 5th step, and it's almost last from bottom for a really good reason, is the platform. This is the technology that you're going to use. This is when you decide, I'm going to use a blog. This is when you decide, I'm going to have a YouTube page. It's not the first thing. You don't say, I want a YouTube page. Now, who am I going to talk to? Who's going to listen to me? Is there anyone who actually cares that I've got videos about plumbing, whatever it happens to be? So that's almost the last thing that you decide, because it's not important. It's not as important as the objectives. It's not as important as the audience and the topic. It's just the channel. It's just the medium. The last thing is measurement, which is what we're talking about. But the loop the connection back from measurement to objectives is really important. And I'm repeating myself now, but I'm emphasizing this. This is really important. This is also the hardest thing to do. It's the hardest thing to do is to take action. It's to take all that learning and all those pretty maps and Google Analytics and this immense flow of data and actually do something with it is very, very difficult. So one solution is just to do the bare necessities. Remember that this isn't actually free. This is the fallacy of Web 2.0 and social media, is that you can set a YouTube page now. You know, anyone on a laptop here this evening could have set up 5 of them while I was giving this presentation so far. And it feels like it's free, but it's not free because you've got that associated resource cost. So make it equivalent to your offline marketing spend. So you're kind of saying, look, I've got a YouTube channel and I'm putting 10 hours a month into whatever that's cost, you aggregate up that salary and say, well, that would be the equivalent of a page in The Guardian or a full page spread in The Times or a radio advert or whatever it happens to be. Try and make it equivalent to offline spending because this is trackable, measurable marketing. It should be the same. And as a rule of thumb, now the costs aren't, the costs aren't really comparable. They're not comparable at all. But you should be treating each of your social media projects like you're about to open a new office in Dusseldorf. It should be the same process, right? It doesn't cost the same, but the thinking that your organization goes through and the strain that it's going to put on your marketing and your resources and your tech support and your customer support is quite comparable to saying, I'm going to open a new office overseas. And if you think like that about opening a YouTube page, you back off. You go, oh, Jesus, I'm not going to do that until I know I've got customers there. I'm not going to do that until I know it's actually going to make a difference to my business. So that's a good thing it's a good, I suppose, analogy to hold in your mind. It's like opening an overseas office. Not in terms of cost, as I said, but. And start small. Do one thing well and be known for being the person who does that well in your sector. Don't open a presence in every single channel. Be the person on Twitter who knows what they're talking about in your sector, rather than being the person who's also on Facebook and LinkedIn and Blogger and YouTube and Twibes. We heard about Twibes there earlier on today. You don't need to be in every single space. And be able to show that it makes a difference. So saying at the very start of the process, my business world will be different in 6 to 12 months' time because I did this. It's going to actually make an impact. That's, you should be stating that at the very start, if you can. What a nice theory. This is all theoretical. This is lovely stuff. It's all, very academic. You should be doing all this stuff. So I'm going to take the acid test myself, and I'm going to talk you through 2 of the projects that we run at Enterprise Ireland. And I'm going to talk you through why we're doing them and talk about some of the measurements that we're using. and try and show you that it can help, it can make a difference. And I'm going to unequivocally state right now that we're not perfect. We make mistakes, we get dragged away, and we're just not perfect. So we don't always practice what we preach. One of my roles in Enterprise Ireland is I'm the sort of community manager or curator for all of our social media projects. So every month I go through those 50 or 60 projects and I look at their measurements and I try and assess whether or not they're still contributing business value to the organisation. And we largely split what we measure down into 2 discrete elements. We look at community health, which is what I was talking about earlier on. So that's how active that community online is, and that's a measure in of itself about the channel, about the platform. So, YouTube is doing well because it's YouTube. And then the other side of the coin, what we look at is the business value. How is this contributing to my strategic goals in my business? Forget the technology. What's the difference in my bottom line? Now, that's really difficult to measure. It's really, really difficult to say that a particular sale came from a tweet or a Facebook or an email that I sent out. That's really, really hard to do. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. I don't have a solution. There's no magic thing that I can tell you for that. Okay.